Hello, this is Dr. Christopher Magnus from MagnumOpusAstrology.com. In this presentation, we're going to discuss a topic that is absolutely fundamental to traditional astrology. You have to understand this before you can make progress in delineating any kind of chart, natal, horary, event, or mundane. This topic is planetary dignity and planetary debility, the strength and weakness of the planets based on their place in the zodiac, their house position, and a number of other factors. When we ask the question, how well is a planet dignified or how badly debilitated, what we want to know is how is this planet going to act in the chart? What kind of effects and how much effectiveness can we expect from it? Can we count on this planet, or do we have to be less trusting and more wary of it? In most modern astrology, you don't tend to ask whether or not a planet is going to do you any good, or if it's going to cause harm. Now, this optimistic attitude can be helpful, because we have to make the best of what we've got. At the same time, bad things happen to us, and if astrology is going to be an art that takes into account everything, it has to take into account the bad as well as the good. Now, when modern astrology looks at a planet and sign combination, let's say Mars in Taurus, it goes something like this. Mars is the planet of assertiveness, and Taurus is a practical, down-to-earth sign. So the person with Mars in Taurus would express their assertiveness in practical and down-to-earth ways. Now that's probably true as far as it goes. But in traditional astrology, when Mars is in Taurus, it's in the sign opposite its own sign Scorpio. If Mars were in Scorpio, it could do what it likes because it's in its own house. But being in Taurus, it doesn't have the resources that it needs to do what it's meant to do, to act in its Mars-like way. In fact, it's ruled by the planet that is just completely opposite its own nature, Venus. So in Taurus, Mars is wanting to act like Mars, but is constrained by the values of Venus. Mars wants to be aggressive, but Venus wants to be sweet, loving, and comfortable. So in Taurus, Mars is probably going to be a little bit too soft. Now, softness is good. Venusian things are good. But we also need a good Mars to go and fight our battles for us. We need good assertiveness. When Mars is in Taurus, our assertive power is defective. In addition, Mars will also have rulership in 2 other houses of the chart at least. If we know that Mars is likely to misbehave because he's in Taurus, then we know to be careful about the affairs of those houses, and to look for other, better sources of planetary assistance to make the most out of them. So what then exactly is planetary dignity? Planetary dignity very simply means that you can count on a planet. It's trustworthy and reliable to do what it's supposed to do according to its nature. For example, Mercury's nature is to be quick-witted and smart. When Mercury is in Virgo or Gemini, where it has a lot of dignity, it's probably going to do its job well without showing its shadow side of being cunning and mischievous. Or let's look at Mars again. We know that Mars's nature is to fight. When Mars is in Aries, Scorpio, or even Capricorn, where it has dignity, we can count on Mars to fight in the right way for the right things, and not malevolently, weakly, or for the wrong causes. Now, the kind of planetary dignity that we've been looking at so far is what traditional astrology calls essential dignity. Essential dignity depends upon a planet being in a sign or in a portion of a sign of the zodiac where it feels more or less at home. There are actually 5 different kinds or levels of essential dignity, one building upon the other. We'll discuss those 5 different kinds of essential dignity in another presentation. But for right now, just remember that a planet with essential dignity can follow its bliss. It can do what it wants according to its own nature without much interference from outside. Traditional astrology also uses a second kind of dignity called accidental dignity. Now, accidental dignity doesn't have anything to do with mishaps and blunders. Instead, it means that a planet gains strength not so much from being in a certain place in the zodiac as it does from being in a certain place in the sky, a position which changes very quickly throughout the day. When we're evaluating a planet's accidental dignity, we're basically asking the question, how much can we expect from a planet? Is it going to act with all of its might, going all out in the chart, or is it going to act with less power, with less force, with less vigor? This is important to know. You can have a planet with lots of essential dignity, with really good quality, but if it doesn't have good accidental dignity, if it's quantitatively weak, then it's not going to be able to do as much good as you'd like it to. On the other hand, a planet with strong essential and accidental dignity can do lots of what it wants to do, and we'd like to see that in a chart. There are many ways that a planet can gain accidental dignity. The most important, though, is by house placement. A planet in one of the angular houses, houses 1, 4, 7, or 10, acts with 100% of its strength. In the succedent houses, 2, 5, 8, and 11, a planet acts with about 50 to 60% of its strength. In houses 3, 6, 9, and 12, the cadent houses, a planet acts maximally with 25% of its strength. You can't really count on those planets as much outside of the affairs of those cadent houses. As I said before, there are a number of other ways that a planet can gain accidental dignity, and we'll look at those in later presentations. So let's wrap up this audio by quickly discussing what planetary debility is. Debility is basically the opposite of dignity. Where dignity tells us about a planet's quality and power, debility describes a planet that is corrupt or weak. As with dignity, we distinguish two kinds of debility. Just as we have essential dignity, we also have essential debility. A planet becomes essentially debilitated by being in a sign of the zodiac where it is forced to act in a way that's contrary to its essential nature. A planet that's essentially debilitated will produce poor or uncertain results, much like the Mars and Taurus example which we discussed earlier. A planet that suffers from accidental debility isn't necessarily in a bad place for it in the zodiac. It might just be receiving a difficult aspect from a planet that causes problems for it. Or it might be placed in or rule over one of the houses that has to do with unpleasant things. The 6th house of illness, the 8th house of fear and the anticipation of death, or the 12th house of secret enemies and self-undoing. So let's sum up. A planet with essential dignity will do what it's supposed to do. If it also has accidental dignity, it will do lots of it, and that's a good thing. By contrast, a planet that suffers from either essential or accidental debility will tend to produce corrupt or weak results. A debility in the chart isn't a death sentence, but like any weakness in ourselves, it has to be acknowledged and managed as best as possible. As I said at the outset, understanding dignity and debility is absolutely fundamental to making progress in traditional astrology. We're going to be using it a lot when we add some nuances to temperament assessment, when we discuss the Lord of the Geniture, or the ally, in the chart, and finally when we look for the significator of manners. This is the planet that describes your MO, your modus operandi, in expressing your motivation and drive. In my next presentation, I'll be discussing the 5 forms of essential dignity, a number of other ways in which a planet can gain accidental dignity, the 2 forms of essential debility, and some other ways that a planet can be accidentally debilitated. Please stay tuned. This is Dr. Christopher Magnus from MagnumOpusAstrology.com. It's been my pleasure exploring traditional astrology with you.